One of the things I found in working these various monuments is the amount of history that even though many of us, well, at least those of the older ones of us lived through this, and it was current events for many of us, you really learn a lot more about Chavez and the farm worker movement by working on these monument recommendations. Our speaker today is Ruben Andrade, and I hope I pronounced that right, who's the superintendent of the Cesar E. Chavez National Monument. Has been in that position since it was established in October 2012. Prior to arriving at the monument, he served as superintendent of the Minuteman National Historic Site in South Dakota, which unfortunately was inactive at the time and armed. Ruben has been in his National Park Service career, began his career in 1998, working as an interpreter at the LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson National Historic Park in Texas. He worked at Capitol National Monument, Fort Union National Monument, and Carlsbad Caverns National Park. Prior to coming to the NPS, he worked as a park ranger with the Army Corps of Engineers at Pine Flat Lake on the Kings River in California. He grew up in Dixon, California, where his family earned a living as farm workers. He served as a soldier in the U.S. Army, later attending California State University, earning both a bachelor's and master's degree in park administration, resource, and visitor protection. So with that introduction, I'm happy to turn this over to Ruben, and I think we'll all find this quite interesting. Thank you.
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? I want to thank you all for inviting me to do this. It's a pleasure. It's this monument's job to help share this, one of America's great stories. Cesar Chavez National Monument is located approximately 30 miles east of Bakersfield, California, and about 20 miles from Mojave, California, on Highway 58. Cesar E. Chavez National Monument is the first national park site established to tell the story of a modern-day Latino hero. On October 8th, 2016, President Barack Obama came to the property in Keene, California, known as Nuestra Señora Reina de la Paz, which means Our Lady Queen of Peace, and most commonly known as La Paz, to establish Cesar Chavez National Monument. He used the authority given to him under the 1906 Antiquities Act, which authorizes the president to establish national monuments by proclamation. The National Park Service has quite a few titles for the different park sites or national park sites, from national parks, of course, seashores, monuments, historic parks. There's just a slew of them. But only monuments can be done by proclamation. La Paz is recognized for its historical significance to Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Worker. Cesar is one of the most revered civil rights leaders in history of the United States, from humble beginnings in Yuma, Arizona, to founding the United Farm Worker. Cesar knew firsthand what it was like to live the life of a farm worker, since his family had to do that from 1938 to later here. Cesar was born March 31st, 1927 to Librero and Juanita Chavez. They had immigrated with their parents years before. Cesar was born in Yuma, Arizona, where his family lived for quite part of his life, and he oh, wait a minute, my computer just took a little dive. Sorry about that. In 1938, his family moved to California after losing their property outside of Yuma, just like many other Americans did during that period in America. They moved to California, lived in places like Oxnard, going back to Arizona, coming back to San Jose, and many other places. His family became farm labor migrant workers, following the crop, moving back and forth. I think he attended over 32 schools during his time as a child, and he only made it to 6th grade. Cesar didn't like school very much, possibly because at home they only spoke Spanish, and in school they were only allowed to speak English often, and they would be reprimanded as Spanish was forbidden. He remembers being punished with the ruler to his knuckles for violating the rule. He remembers that some schools were segregated, and he felt that in schools he was not treated very well. Integrated schools, he was like a monkey in a cage, he says. He remembers having to listen to a lot of racist remarks. He remembers seeing signs that read whites only. He and his brother Richard attended, it was 37 schools, I'm sorry. It was a hard time. There's notes about, him going with his father to a coffee shop in California and coming up to the front door and them telling him to go around the back to get the cup of coffee to take to his mother. It was not a really good time for them. He moved around quite a bit. In 1946, at the age of 19, he joined the Navy. It's one of the things that is not very commonly known is that Cesar was actually a patriot. As we all know, anybody that joins the military is signed on to protect this nation, even if it's has to come to giving up their lives. It's kind of the thing we do is when we join the military is be willing to fight for everything we can. And it's funny that later in life, in newspapers, he was depicted as communist, somebody that had no love for his nation. I think that for many years, and even today, people don't even realize that he was born in America. They think that he came from Mexico or something. After the Navy, in 1948, he married Helen Fabula, who he met in Delano, where the family was living at the time. Another passion of Cesar was the California missions. So for their anniversary, for their honeymoon, Helen and Cesar traveled California, visiting many of the missions from Sonoma to San Diego. And it's something that he really loved. I've heard stories from his children, Paul and Sylvia, and some of the others, that when they'd go on vacation, when he had a chance to take the family somewhere, they'd go to a mission somewhere, maybe San Antonio Mission, which is over at Fort Honolulu, and he'd get down, greet the father, and then tell the father, he'd say, hey, what needs to be done here? The boys are ready to take the shovels out of the trunk of the car and do whatever you need them. Of course, the kids weren't real happy, but but they did the work. In time, in 1952, Cesar was able to get a job through connections of his brother in a lumber yard, which took them out of the fields. They moved to San Jose in a neighborhood in a barrio known as Sal Si Puedes, which means get out if you can. He there met a man by the name of Cel Ross. Fred Ross. And Fred was a community organizer that had gone to San Jose to set up a chapter of a grassroots group of Mexican Americans in the community to help organize them with voter registration, helping them learn how to move through bureaucracy in the communities and make things better for himself. So the community service organization, after a while, got Chavez to actually work for him, and he did quite well. He climbed the ladder, opening up different chapters and different places. For the next 10 years, Chavez learned organizing the communities around the state, setting up citizenship classes, fighting police brutality, lobbying for paved streets and better schools. He was doing anything he could to empower poor people and teach them to make demands on the political system that had been ignored for many years. They had quite a few victories, and he was doing great. But, at heart, in his heart, he always thought back on his youth and his childhood as a farm laborer and all the injustices that were done out there and the life that they lived. Truly, that profession was not thought of very highly. The people were treated very badly. And he talked to his wife, he talked to Helen and said, Helen, somebody should do something about this. Somebody should try to make a better life for these farm workers. Helen said, well, why don't you do something about it, Cesar? And Cesar pondered about it for quite a while. And in 1962, he gave up that decent job that he had, and they moved back to Delano. They moved to Delano not having anything really, just a little bit of savings. Mrs. Chavez worked again in the fields. Well, Cesar would drive around the country, knocking on doors, going around, trying to build this organization. And, sometimes it's said that sometimes he would go days just driving and people not wanting to respond or not being willing to do anything. So him and his partner, Dolores Huerta, just kept on working. Eventually, they had time. Now, his dream of a union, organizing the farm workers, was not just about making a union. As a matter of fact, he wanted more than just a union. These farm workers had nothing. They had no collateral. They could not get a loan anywhere. They were not treated as full citizens, even though, back in those days, most of the farm laborers were Americans. They were displaced workers. There were still workers from the Dust Bowl. There was just workers from Texas and other places that had moved around to make a little better life, most of them without an education. It's unlike today that, many of the farm laborers are from other countries. Back then, the big bulk of them were Americans. But they wanted to do something better. So Cesar's brother, Richard, had a house. And one day he asked Richard, he says, hey, Richard, what do you think your house is worth? Richard came up with a number, and before you knew it, Cesar had convinced Richard to take a second mortgage on his house so that they could start a credit union. So, people could come in and buy small amounts. Back in those days, a tire might not be as much, priced as high as it is today, but even at those low prices, if somebody got a blowout in a car and it was the middle of winter, they didn't have a strong income, so the credit union would make small loans, basically just on trust. They started doing, other things to make sure that the life of the farm laborers were a little better. Then in 1965, a group of Filipino farm laborers who had had some success in the Coachella Valley and other places decided that they were going to go on strike. But they knew that, just like anything else back in those days, or even today, if they went on strike, one group would be pitted against the other group, so what they would do is, in essence, go to the Mexican Americans and try to get them to do the fields. So Larry Ilion, who had put that union together, came to Chavez and says, hey, you know, would you guys join us in the union and join us in this strike? Well, Cesar and Dolores were not quite ready to do that. They were still building their membership. They were still building their union. They had foreseen that they would do something like this, 5, 10 years later when they were able to build their infrastructure and their support programs and everything else. So they were meeting, they all met, and it was back and forth, why they should, why they shouldn't. And again, Mrs. Chavez stood up and said, are we a union or what are we? At that point, a vote was taken, and the National Farm Workers Association joined AWOC, which was the Filipino group, and they went on strike. It took years. The strike wasn't going the best. The farmers were doing everything that they could to destroy the strike, to the point where they were actually, in some cases, taking buses down to Tijuana, Mexicali, the border towns, and bringing back up busloads of workers. So the work was getting done. And the grapes were winding up at the stores. They were still selling product, and Cesar was wondering, how can we do this? How can we make this happen? So they started talking about boycotting. So their next large campaign, they were still striking in the fields, but they were sending members, volunteers all over the nation to boycott, to start the boycott program, boycotting from here to Boston to Maine, everywhere. And that is what eventually made them sign a contract with the first union. But during this whole time, while they were on strike, the farmers were hiring and bringing in folks to break this strike, to break what was going on. And at one point, the workers themselves were tired of this peaceful engagement. They felt that, they needed to do something back. So some of the younger farm workers or strikers started pushing the fact that they should hit back. And at some point, Cesar realized that he was losing the grips. He was wondering what he did, how he was failing, that the members were willing to start a fight. So he went on his first strike, on his first hunger strike, and he wasn't blaming anybody else. It was more of a penance, and he, for approximately 25 days, was at the 40 acres, not eating anything but bread and water. This is what brought a lot of attention to the movement and brought other people, politicos and others, into supporting the United Farm Workers. Congress decided that they were going to do a little investigation, and Bobby Kennedy came out here with others, and they had this big meeting. And in that, Bobby was questioning the sheriff, and he asked the sheriff, you know, what made you arrest the farm workers? What is it that made you put them in jail? And, you know, he was kind of arrogant, and he says, well, you know, I heard that they were going to get stabbed, they were going to get killed, they were going to get hurt if we didn't do something. And, you know, Bobby asked, so where did you get this information? He says, well, from the people working for the farmers. And it went back and forth, and you know, Bobby Kennedy before lunch says, you know, during the lunch break, I suggest that you and the county attorney go read the Constitution. Kind of set him back and put the county sheriff on his heels, and from then on, things were a little bit different. So at that point, during this whole meeting that they were here, Cesar thought, you know, we should do something. We should take we should take the opportunity to do something big, since we have all this media attention here. If you can imagine, national press was here, and so let's do something big. So they decided to do the march from Delano to Sacramento and bring more attention to the issue. You know, they had just done the walk to Selma back east. So he was taking the lead off what Dr. King had done. So they started the march, and the county sheriff and the city police in Delano blocked the streets because they didn't have a permit. So they were going to make a big deal about it, but once they realized that all the press was there, they figured out a way to just let them go from Delano to Sacramento. You know, they continued to strike, they continued to boycott, and move forward. Cesar was arrested quite a few times for different reasons. Some say were trumped-up cases. They try to make it illegal for them to even say the words such as huelga, which means strike, or the words boycott. The farmers, the agribusiness in California had a lot of strength, and they still do. So they just kept going. They just kept going, making it happen. In 70, they signed the first contract with farmers. They were able to initiate pension plans for their members. They were able to establish health programs. To this day, here on the grounds where the monument is where the executive offices for the United Farm Workers are, the health plan, the benefit plan, and their finance offices. By the way, the monument itself is 105 acres. Only 2 of those acres are federal property. I think part of the intent for that is that to protect the whole site. Now, let's talk a little bit about the site. The site itself was originally a county property. First, it was a quarry for the county roads, Kern County roads, and then in the early 1900s, the nation started building tuberculosis sanatoriums. There was no cure, there was no real medicine for tuberculosis. So actually in California, up along the foothills at this approximate elevation there was some up and down the valley, Central Valley. There was a hospital here for the tuberculosis center. There was all the infrastructure. There was also a prevatorium, which they called the North Unit. That's where they would bring folks that had other illnesses. And so the infrastructure was here. Everything was here. In the late 60s, medicine came about, and these places kind of were not needed anymore. The county decided to divest themselves of this property as, you know, deferred maintenance and the age of the property. It's not in a city. It's out in, you know, in the middle of nowhere. So they decided to sell it. Cesar found out about it and thought, you know, this would be a great place to establish our headquarters. They had 40 acres in Delano. But the 40 acres in Delano had, you know, a gas station, a big hall, a health center, and Abaguani Village were the housing unit that was built to house the Filipino Manang brothers. I'll go into that later. But this place had everything. They weren't going to have to build anything else to keep going, to bring volunteers, to train people. So many people had asked, many supporters had asked Cesar that, you know, in the future, if something came about that he needed, that he would like something donated, they'd be glad to help. They just didn't want to hand over money because money comes, money goes. So he got a hold of one of these folks that decided, you know, that had asked Cesar if he ever wanted anything to give him a call. It was a movie producer out of Los Angeles, and they talked, and they decided that they'd go look at this property. Now, if the county would have ever gotten wind that Cesar wanted what was in, you know, Stony Brook Sanatorium, they would have left. They would have not given it to in any way. So this producer and Cesar's brother Richard came to see the property. Richard acted as a chauffeur, you know, taking notes and looking at all these things. And they came back and met with Cesar and Dolores and the rest of the team, and he wanted to know what Cesar was willing to give for this place. And so Cesar had everybody put a price on a piece of paper and throw it in a hat. And then he looked at all of them. And at the end, he just told the straw buyer, whatever it takes. He was asking their opinion, but it really didn't matter. He wanted this place. So they bought it for about $138,000, somewhere in there. For 187 acres with all these structures, which was phenomenal. When the county found out what had happened, the Bakersfield newspaper printed an article and in essence said some Jewish communist movie producer had bought this property and turned it over to that black communist Mexican Cesar Chavez for the United Farm Workers. Paul Chavez, Cesar's son, says that the county did not bother to cash a check for quite a while, almost 2 years. I guess they were thinking that if they didn't cash a check, somehow it could be undone. But it didn't. It's still their headquarters and still going strong. You know, this monument tells a story that is still evolving. Farm workers still need to have a better life and better working conditions. And it's been going on since the beginning. You know, in 2012, when we came out here, my wife and I, both of our parents, or you know, all our families, both of our families were farm laborers, and we took a drive to the coast. One of the things that we saw that we had never saw when we were younger was driving by strawberry fields and seeing these trailer units, or you know, like 20-foot long trailer with a little roof, a table, and benches for the farm workers to sit in the shade and have a lunch. Things have really changed. One of the first laws that Cesar had changed was to get rid of the short hoe, el cortito, which was a short-handled hoe. They weren't sold that way. The farmers would actually cut off the longer handle. Their idea was that it would give the worker a better chance to be closer to the plants to make sure that when they were thinning out, they wouldn't, or weeding, that they wouldn't take plants that didn't need to be taken. And, it was never really reality. It was just one way to control, we think. And here, just a few days ago, Governor Brown signed legislation to provide farm laborers overtime after 8 hours, something that's brand new. I guess the union's been fighting for this for years, but things are still changing. The union is still working to make a better life, and just they keep moving. So back to, I mentioned Abaguani Village a little bit ago. Abaguani Village, that's a Filipino name, was built in the early part of the Union to provide housing for the Manung brothers. Manung were Filipinos that were brought to America to work, and they were used to different industries. Up in Washington and down here, they were used for farm laborers. They were brought over at a time when there were still laws on the books that said that Asians could not marry Anglos or whites. So there was this large group of men that had been farm laborers who were getting to that time of retirement where they couldn't, their bodies could no longer work in the field doing that kind of work, but they didn't have a family network. They didn't, they didn't have any real savings. They were going to be on their own and kind of destitute. So the UFW, Cesar, decided that they needed to figure out some housing for this. So at the 40 acres, they built a housing unit, built very much like a college dorm. So each man had his own room with his bed in it. They shared a common bathroom, two bedrooms to a common bathroom, and everybody ate in the cafeteria. And this went on just about a little over 10 years ago. I think the last one of the Manung brothers finally passed away. I mean, they couldn't marry anybody. They couldn't unless they were Filipino, and they weren't able to bring their wives around by the time that they could do anything. They were already older in age. So now the Chavez Foundation, which is our partners, our main partners here, still does a lot in housing. They provide low-income homes in many areas, California, Arizona, and Texas. So as I was saying, this is still a moving story, still moving forward, still trying to make life better. So we have approximately 25 minutes left. I've been talking for a long time. I'd like to open it up for questions if anybody has any. Anybody have any questions? Are we still here?
Still here. Yes, we're here.
All right.
So did they pay off Richard's mortgage?
Pardon?
Did they pay off Richard's mortgage?
Did they pay off their mortgage?
Well, yeah. He took a second mortgage on his house.
Oh yes. Richard's mortgage. Oh yeah, there was probably quite a few seconds taken out of that house, but yes. Yes. It wasn't a lot of money. In time, they joined a bigger financial credit union, and it went on for many, many years. When they moved here, they actually opened up a credit union office in the lower level of what's now our visitor center. Now, when we got this land, and when the Chavez Foundation gave us this property, we didn't build anything. In essence, we took over a turnkey operation. Cesar had wanted to be buried in what, back in those days, was a rose garden. Now, this rose garden, if you know Latinos, there's a few roses. It grouped together as a rose garden. But there were some roses between a road, a parking lot, another road right in front of the administration building, which is what the visitor center is. And for many years, that's what it looked like, just, kind of plain. And the family started thinking that they needed to do something a little more. So they had landscape architects come out and design something that has the flavor of a mission walls, no granite, no polished marble, it's all looks like the earth. At the same time, they took out the road and the parking lot, and they realized that if they were going to have visitors, they also might want to put together a little exhibit. So they took the administration building, where his office was, and Dolores' office, and also the legal staff, and thought about, looked at it as making it a museum or a visitor center. And they realized that it was going to be so much more expensive to bring that building up to code than it would be to actually start over again. But they wanted to keep the historic fabric of his office, so they brought in folks from the Smithsonian to catalog everything in his office, move it out, and then they put a very thick milled plastic over that portion of the office underneath the roof, and then tore the rest of the building down and built it back up, built a new building over that. So it still looks the same, or has the same footprint, but now it's a new building, and his office looks very much like the day he passed away. Another question.
Was Cesar Chavez on the FBI's hit list like Martin Luther King? Is there any evidence that he was, their efforts to, I don't know, I mean, you talked about some characterizations that weren't great, sort of at the state level, I think.
Right.
But what about federal?
So shortly after they moved the headquarters here, and he was living here. His family wasn't here yet, but he was here. The FBI got a hold of the organization and let them know that there was a hitman with a contract out on his life. So Cesar, left this property and went into hiding for a little bit. As a matter of fact, Helen and the children came out to the home where he was, and he wasn't there. And there was another fella here that, she went and knocked on the door. Because if you can imagine, it was a hospital complex, so there was residence buildings for the nurses and the doctors and stuff. So that, that's part of the whole wanting to be here was a campus. So he went and knocked on his door, and he says, "Where's Cesar?" And he says to her, "Don't get worried, but Cesar is not here," and told her what had happened. So Cesar had gone into hiding for a little bit, but after a while he said, "You know what? I'm doing what I need to be doing. If somebody's going to take my life, I'm not going to be hiding. I need to do this, so I'm going to go ahead and do it." Well, at that point, Miss Helen decided, you know what, if that's what he really wants to do, who am I not to move to La Paz with him? And there was a few things that that kept on happening that the FBI would share with them so that he could stay safe. Now, I forgot one part. I didn't tell you why Mrs. Chavez didn't want to move to this place. So when Cesar found Stony Brook, what was then called Stony Brook, he told Helen, he says, Helen, he called her mother. He says, Mother, he says, I found this beautiful place where we're going to move our headquarters. It's in the mountains. And we had opportunity to spend some time with Miss Helen. And so she was telling some of the stories. And she said, she said that she asked, where are we moving? To Santa Barbara? Because there's also agricultural fields around Santa Barbara. And that's the place she really loved. And he says, no, Mother. We are moving to Keene. At that point, her demeanor changed and says, I'm not moving to Keene. I'm never moving to Keene, no matter what you say. The reason for that is I talked about the North Unit earlier, the hospital that was actually a prevatorium. When Mrs. Chavez was approximately 7 years old, the rural health nurses went to her house outside of Delano, where they lived out in a rural community, and they realized that she was suffering from malnutrition. So they brought her to the prevatorium for about a year. Now, Delano is about an hour and 15 minutes from here on these nice roads. Can you imagine way back then what that travel was like? And her parents didn't have a car. It was rough for her to get here, so she rarely saw them. So it was nothing but a bad experience, and she was not willing to be here until after they found out about the death threat and his willingness to truly fight for the campesinos. Any other questions?
What was their relation like with the rest of the labor movement, AFL-CIO, railroad workers, service workers? Was there financial support, challenge, disagreement?
Yeah, there was always financial at the beginning, trying to figure out how the union was moving forward. But it always seemed that when that special need was needed for the union, that somehow they would be able to meet the challenge. And they did have lots of supporters. I mean, many people in this nation were willing to support the boycott and support with dollars. I believe it was the Auto Workers Union also helped with some dollars to help feed the folks and make sure that everybody was able to be okay during that time. But yeah, between them there was not a struggle. They, when you grow up poor, you learn to accept being a little broke sometimes, no matter where you get. And Cesar really didn't own any of this. It was, he lived off of. He was a very humble man. He didn't decide to make the funds of the organization be part his. I mean, he passed away not really owning anything.
How did Bakersfield and the surrounding community receive the National Monument designation?
Good. There's never been any. I have never heard anybody being disgruntled about it in the local community of Tehachapi, in the Bakersfield area. Chamber of Commerce and all those folks are glad we're here. There's not the outpouring support, like other units might have, that the community fought to have it done or have something established. There's not that kind, but there is. I have not heard any negativity, and only hear folks asking how we're doing, how we're growing, and are we getting to the next level? Yeah, it's good.
In addition to the site at Keene, are there any things to see, monuments and such, in Delano?
Yeah, so the 40 acres are still in Delano. It's a historic site. It's a National Historic Landmark, rather. Filipino Hall, where the Filipino organization, Filipino farm workers, were kind of gathered around, is still there. But it's a rural community. That's about it. I mean, you can drive by and see an old Voice of America station, which is right across the 40 acres. I don't know if you all know that in 2008, Congress tasked the National Park Service with doing a special resource study to see what properties, what locations might work as a National Historic Park that would commemorate Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers Movement. And that special resource study was transmitted to Congress in 2013. This last year, a congressman moved legislation forward. We haven't heard anything yet. But some other major, there was a lot of major places and then lesser places that could be done. So the 40 acres in Delano, Filipino Community Hall in Delano, were two sites that were recommended, along with this one. Also, McDonald Hall in San Jose, where Cesar began his CSO work, and the Santa Rita Center in Tucson, Phoenix, Tucson, I believe. So if that special resource study ever does, get into legislation and gets approved, this would actually be a National Historic Park with 5 sites.
Thanks.
Anything else? There's just so much to share that as I'm looking at my notes, I'm going, I didn't even talk about that. Yeah. Caesar's last fast, he did 3 fasts. There's also a couple of great videos one could watch. 2 of them are, I think you can get them both on Netflix. One is the movie, of course it's a movie based on the history. It takes more of the familial point of view on Caesar's life. And then there is a documentary. It's called Caesar's Last Fast. Caesar's Last Fast, I know, is on Netflix, and it's real footage of the time. It's footage that had been collected and put together, and then somebody built it into a documentary, which is kind of centered around his last fast, which was a protest against pesticides and what was going on in the valley and in agriculture here. But then it shoots off to when he was little, and it shoots off to the beginning the CSO or the union, and it's pretty good. If somebody wants to learn some history on that, I kind of point them towards that. And it's pretty good. Look at my notes to see what else I can share. Any other questions?
See, he was a vegan. I'm looking at the Wikipedia. Now, that's probably not, What do you think? Is that a pretty fair treatment?
He was a vegetarian.
Vegetarian.
Yes.
It says he was a vegan in this thing.
Yeah.
They get things wrong.
I mean, I believe he would eat fish on occasion, but for the most part, I mean, he was definitely a vegetarian. He took time to meditate. You know, he was pretty well rounded and it seemed that he was pretty healthy. When he passed away, it was quite a surprise for the family and for everybody because he seemed in good health. But it seems to be
6 or so, right? He wasn't very old.
No, yeah. What folks are kind of thinking is that, you know, all the pressure that was put on his body from the fast. I mean, the last fast was 36 days. That's quite a bit. So I think that his body had taken that toll from that. He was talked to a person that was with him that day, and he simply was reading and fell asleep and just never woke up. They were thinking that he'd be right back. Mrs. Chavez, on the other hand, had some health issues. She had life estate to the Chavez home here on the property, which is, you know, part of the park. She went to the doctor for some issues. Was in the hospital for a little bit. They were expecting her home on Friday. As a matter of fact, the family called up and said, "Hey, have somebody." To the foundation and said, "Hey, so have somebody go in and turn on the air conditioner in Nana's house." And so they did. And then they said, "No, we're going to keep her a little longer." I got a call on Sunday and said, "Hey, she's in ICU." And that Monday, you know, the family was going to have to make a decision. It was hope was probably not going to be good with her. And earlier that afternoon, when they had to get ready to make a decision, she passed away. And she was buried right next to Cesar, right here on the property, and that was something that was, you know, decided way before we became a national park site.
What time of year would you recommend is a good one to visit the area?
You know, I would say spring is the most beautiful time. The fall is good. July and August are probably the warmest. We can get to 100 degrees during that time. We are 10 to 20 degrees cooler than the valley, just because our elevation is, you know, 2,600 feet higher, or 2,600, feet higher than down there. But spring, the rose garden is just super bloomed. Everything is green. The roses are great, and everything up here, the hills are green. So yeah. In the fall, we are cool again. So I mean, right now we're probably 80 degrees outside, 85 degrees outside with no humidity. So,
can you see the Sierra Nevadas from where you are, or is that too?
You can. We are at the most southern tip. They're called the Tehachapi Mountains, but it's that end of that. But you could see them from the drive up. I mean, here on the property itself, you cannot, because we are surrounded by other hills. But so you can't see out to. But on the way up here, you can. But I was wrong. He actually graduated from the 8th grade, so he made it to the 8th grade. Looking over some things that I might share with you guys, since we still have some time. Not much. We only got about 3 minutes. Okay, any other questions? Well, if anybody would ever like to give me a call or drop me an email asking anything else or to learn about the place, or you want to come down, you can call the park at 661-823-6134, and yeah, I'd be glad to entertain that. And of course, you know, email is NPS email, so Ruben_Andrade@nps.gov. It would be a pleasure to correspond with anybody.
We want to thank you for your time. This has been very entertaining and enlightening and inspiring.
I hope it's what you were looking for. Like I said, it's just there's so many stories to tell.
Yes, and like I said, we'll have to call you back and be able to get some more stories from you. In fact, we may have somebody that might be driving down there, so if she does, I will have her look you up and take some pictures and be able to maybe put it in our SOL newsletter to let everybody else enjoy this via her pics. So. Great.
And yeah, if you wanted to do that also, I could, I'm sure are you guys on Google Drive? Mm-hmm. Or I can send you an email, a picture or two of the site if you'd like. Just drop me an email. Okay. I'd be glad to do that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, folks. I wish we could have done it with some video, but this was great. You guys have a wonderful day.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.